All right, welcome everyone to the Spring Survey webinar of 2022. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Audrey Cruz. I think I know most folks on this call, but for anyone watching later, I'm the Community Engagement Director at the Grand Canyon Trust, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based in Flagstaff. And I'll let my fellow co-presenters introduce themselves as well.
Hey everyone, my name's David Vines, and I'm the GIS manager here at the Trust. And I'm based in Boulder, Colorado, and I use he, him pronouns.
Hey everyone, good to see you all on here. Mike Popejoy, Utah Public Lands Director with Grand Canyon Trust and based just outside of Torrey. Happy to have you all here.
I'm Vera Markgraf. Whoops, I think it turned off. I am usually doing the botany of the surveys, so that's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Vera. I think for today we might skip introductions of other folks, but feel free to put your introductions in the chat box, as well as any other questions that you might have if you want to just populate them in the chat box, and then we'll look at them later. So I'm going to hopefully start the slideshow here. Are you all seeing the slideshow screen?
Yeah, maybe it goes full screen, maybe.
I think it will in just a second, maybe.
Okay.
Are you not seeing it full screen? Hopefully you're seeing it pretty big.
That's pretty big.
So today our objective is to just review this spring survey project here at the Trust. And then we have made a couple of updates to the survey app that we're using to collect data. So we want to share that with you in terms of project details and updates. So even if you were with us in 2021 on the last spring survey trip we did, we still have updates for you. And then part two, we're going to cover all the protocols that we do now using the app-based technology. And so if you did not come with us on a trip in 2021, or you're brand new to this project, we really encourage you to stay tuned for part two. And we'll go briefly through the protocols at that point.
All right, thanks Audrey. So we thought we'd start quickly with just a big picture just to orient folks to the project and remind ourselves why springs are so important on the Colorado Plateau and further afield too. So I think as a lot of folks know, the definition we use for springs are places where groundwater emerges onto or near the surface. And it includes near the surface because sometimes springs can present as wetland vegetation and sometimes not have water coming out or only be seasonal. So that's what we're focusing on, those really unique places. And as folks know, they're particularly important in arid landscapes like the Colorado Plateau, given how little water there is across the landscape at large. And springs also support a high amount of biodiversity in a relatively small footprint. And that includes everything from large mammals like bighorn sheep and coyotes to amazing vegetation down to aquatic invertebrates also. So an extremely high amount of biodiversity in a very small area that exceeds usually the amount you can find where there's not this precious water coming to the surface. So I thought on the next slide here, I just put two nice pictures of some amazing plants at springs, a monkey flower on the left and an alcove primrose on the right. These two flowers are both found at the same spring. And these are the kinds of species that without water, you won't find on the landscape. So springs are special places with some special species like these amongst many others. So why are we collecting springs data? I think a lot of folks on the call are aware of this, but our sort of top line priority is to improve the management of springs and thus improve their proper functioning as intact ecosystems. Another reason we're collecting this data is there are lots of springs across the landscape, even though the water is rare. It comes out in many places, especially on a landscape as large as the Colorado Plateau. Despite this, we lack basic information about many of these springs, and that can include if the location is accurate, that can include if they're accessible to livestock, if they're being piped. There's lots of information we just don't have about many of these sites. And I think as a lot of you folks know who have been hiking out on the landscape, many of these springs are in poor condition due to various human uses or exploitation. And that can include groundwater pumping, it can include direct access by livestock, it can include vehicle traffic over the spring or over the vegetation. So that's another reason that we're engaged in this project, is to try to document where the problems are and how to fix them. So I thought I'd just give you a quick, two quick images of the kinds of differences that we see out there. The first is a degraded spring. This is a spring where the water is emerging from the right side of the picture on a slope. You can see a lot of trampling. There's a trail going through on the left with some cow pies on the trail. You can see hoof marks and water gathering there, shearing of the soil, very little vegetation. Unfortunately, this is a site that's probably fairly familiar to many of you, but these are the kinds of situations we're trying to improve and to change management. And we'll contrast that on the next slide with a healthy spring. This is a spring that emerges near the back of the photo. It's in Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, has been fenced out from livestock use, and you can see robust, healthy wetland vegetation in the middle. You can see cottonwoods on the side and standing pools of water. So this is sort of the kind of thing we're trying to move many of these conditions towards. And so we also wanted to talk quickly about how the data that you all gather will be used. So this Springs Survey123 app that we're going to talk through today basically sends the data to us internally that we'll store in a database and that we'll be able to do various cool things with. That's mostly the realm of David, which he'll talk about later. And this is why one of the significant values of transitioning from paper to this app allows us to do some really cool things that we couldn't do before. So we'll be developing an internal database, and we'll also be sharing this information with the Springs Stewardship Institute, which is sort of the authoritative repository for Springs information, certainly in our region, probably in all of North America and maybe in the world. They're one of the leaders in this effort, and we've taken a lot of guidance and direction from them in this project too. So what we'll hope to do is to use this data to advocate for management changes such as spring protection and restoration in some of our priority landscapes. I think folks who have been on trips with us know that at the moment that includes places like Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, where we're engaged in an effort to get a systematic inventory of springs. It includes places like the footprint of the Forest Restoration Initiative in Northern Arizona, where we're also engaged in a very in-depth effort to inventory and restore and protect springs. And those landscapes will expand to others over time, and we'll also hopefully be asking for help from folks when we get to the point of trying to advocate for change through various processes with the agencies and the land managers. And so lastly, just to come back to this point about moving away from paper, which I know is painful for some people, it's painful for me. I very much still prefer reading books on paper and taking notes on paper, but the survey really does improve our efficiency significantly. So basically it cuts the time of data collection at least in half, because you're not writing it in the field and then having to then transfer that paper into electronic format eventually, which is what we had to do previously. It was challenging to keep up with that backlog of getting the data in once we're back from the field. And lastly, having the ability to have all this data electronic also increases the power of what we can do with it. And that's where our GIS wizard, David, who's going to talk later, who's on the call, helps us with being able to really utilize this data and do really cool analyses, really cool comparisons, using the spatial location and using maps that just isn't possible when we're talking about stacks of data sheets or even just Excel sheets that are saved electronically. So it really is valuable from a conservation outcome standpoint to make this transition too. So that's the direction we're going. And next we're going to talk through a little bit more how exactly that's going to work and questions you all might have.
Great, thanks, Mike. Just a couple of details to review. There are 2 ways to participate in doing spring surveying with the Grand Canyon Trust. You can come to an in-person training this spring or summer. And I think shortly the chat box will have a link to our events page. So if you haven't signed up yet for one of those, I know Roy's on several of them. Thanks, Roy. But you're welcome to still join those. They're all happening in Northern Arizona this year. Or the second way to participate is to watch this webinar and then go survey springs on your own. So that's what we're hoping to help you with today, is making sure you have kind of the tools and the awareness to go out and collect data autonomously. We suggest that you go out in the springtime when things are blooming, or perhaps after monsoons in the summer when you'll have good plant growth. But really, springs can be monitored at any time of the year, so don't feel like you have to restrict yourselves just to this time of year. Couple of risk management reminders. Please don't survey these remote springs that are sometimes hard to access on your own. Let folks know where you're going, when you're expected back, and what they should do if you're overdue. And just make sure you take sunscreen, water, food, emergency gear, and communication devices, and just have that plan and communicate it with others. And finally, springs, as we've just heard, are delicate, special, sacred places across the landscape. We know that many Indigenous people have been stewarding these precious gems in this arid environment long before we came along. And so please use discretion when you're collecting springs data, and do not share the location of springs or any archaeological sites that you might see along the way with anyone else. Thanks in advance, we really appreciate it. So as Mike said, where should you go collect spring data on your own? The whole Colorado Plateau, which is pictured here, is really up for grabs as far as monitoring springs. But as Mike mentioned, we have a couple areas of focus. The blue here, the left is Grand Staircase, now restored, and Bears Ears on the right. So those are areas of particular interest for the Grand Canyon Trust and many other partners and tribes that we work with. So if you happen to be out adventuring, those are good places to focus your efforts. And then, as I mentioned, the trips we'll actually be leading this year are focused on what's called the 4 Forest Restoration Initiatives footprint, which are 4 forests here. You can see Flagstaff is sort of in the middle of this map, and that's the Coconino, South Kaibab, Apache Sitgraves, and Tonto National Forest. So that's where we'll also be focusing some of our efforts as far as the trips. So you can kind of go about this in 2 ways. You can pick a hike first, like you're going to go hike Calf Creek in Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. And then before actually heading outside, consult the Survey123 app to see if there are springs that are along your hike that you might be able to help us monitor. But you could also consult the app first and make your determination of where you want to go hiking based on some cool springs you want to go check out in a given location. So next, I'm going to turn it over to David, because he's going to talk about how we've updated the app to allow you to actually navigate a little bit within the app to those springs. So David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Audrey. Yeah, so we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts of using the app now. So one of the first things I wanted to mention is that when you open up Survey123, you may be prompted at the top. You'll see in this first screenshot that there's an update available. So whenever you see that there's an update available, please always click on that and then follow the prompts to update the survey. After you've updated the survey, you can then click on the survey and then click the plus button in the bottom to begin to collect springs information, or also to view the maps within the survey so you can kind of explore springs in an area you may want to visit. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is the maps within the app itself. So we do have some limitations on the mapping within the survey, but what we've done is we've designed offline maps that's maps you bring into the field with you in this survey that show you your location within the map. And then it also shows you what springs you're near by zooming in on the map. So the way you do that would be to click on the map area, and then you'll see a zoomed in version of the map, like the screenshot on the right. And then once you are in that interface, you can zoom in using your fingers to see the spring location and where you are. And if you zoom in far enough, you can see the name of the spring and also the Spring Stewardship Institute ID for that spring, which will be helpful in the rest of the survey. Something else that's powerful about this interface is you can change the base map. So in that right screenshot, you can see I have circled the base map icon. You can click that button and you can change between our 3 offline maps that are automatically loaded into the survey. One is called the Plateau Springs Public Lands base map. That's going to show you springs and their location for the entire Colorado Plateau. Then there's also the Northern Arizona and the Southern Utah base maps. We have these broken up because these are going to be priority landscapes for us, and they include a more detailed base map so that you can see other features on the ground as you approach springs. And just as a note, these maps are great for seeing where you are when you're in the field. They're not necessarily that good for, say, finding directions or navigating from Flagstaff to Grand Staircase to the spring of your choice, for example. And then one last note, two last things. The orange dots, the orange springs, are unsurveyed springs. So within the Spring Stewardship Institute's database, those springs have never been surveyed. And then the blue springs are springs that have been surveyed before. And then the final thing I'll mention is that one thing to watch out for is when you change the base map, sometimes, for example, because I'm in Colorado, if I change to the Northern Arizona base map, it will automatically locate me in Colorado and I'll see just a gray screen. Not to worry, if you use your fingers to zoom out, you can zoom out far enough to where you can see the base map, and then you can scroll over to it and zoom in. So unless you are within that particular landscape of the base map, you may need to locate it, scroll over, and then zoom in to view it.
Great, thanks, David. So once again, just a quick reminder that it's important you open this app and do any updates one last time before heading out into onto your adventure. But just making sure you do that where you have good Wi-Fi connectivity. You probably won't be able to do any updates once you're out there. On like cellular data, it can be a little hit or miss. So just recommend that you do that once before you come home, or before you go out, excuse me. And great, we'll pause here and just let us know if you have any questions. I am in the next part, we'll review the spring survey protocols, including like downloading the app and logging on to the app and getting the right project. So if what I sent in an email today was a little bit confusing, we'll go over that in more detail. So that's coming. But any questions for David, Mike, or I about the updates and just sort of the general project? All right, so we are going to move on to the next part, which is the spring survey protocols content, really. And I shared this document with some of you ahead of time of this presentation. I will send this presentation out to you later as well, but you can also find the link to this document in the chat box right now. So if possible, you're welcome to follow along with this document if you have the ability to open it. First and foremost, folks need to download the Survey123 app. And this is really the platform or the software that we and many other citizen science projects are using to help us easily collect data in a field setting because of the power of cell phones to have an embedded GPS device that geolocates us on the landscape while we're collecting the data. To access this particular project, which we've named GCT Spring Survey, you'll need to go to this website, the HTTPS you see here on the screen. And I highly recommend doing this from your smartphone's web browser. I've put it in an email for you so you can access it that way. Otherwise, you'll need to type this in exactly as you see it here. Once you type that website address in, you'll see the screen below. And it gives you two options, open in browser, open in Survey123 field app. Please select the field app option and it will automatically take you into the app and it will ask you if it can access photos and know your location. Please let it do all of those things. And the next step is, this is what the left screenshot is what you're going to see when you open the app, and everyone is going to continue without signing in. So you'll just click that sentence or tap it, and then you should see our survey located on your screen. If you've signed up for other citizen science projects, like I'm part of the Utah Pollinator Pursuit, then those might be on the screen as well. But you're really looking for the GCT Spring Survey. So you'll tap that icon. And then to get started, you'll click the Collect button. So this is a little bit of a review of what David was just talking about in terms of the updates we've made since we last saw some of you. To find out where the spring is, you're going to tap the map. And you may need to zoom in or out at first, as he said, depending on where you're located and where the sort of base map is. You might not see your little icon and you are this little blue flag sticking up. The base map option is right here where the red arrow is pointing. And then once you're done and you can see that you're standing next to a spring, in this case, Chimney Spring is the name, 802 is the Spring Stewardship Institute's ID number for that spring, it's unique. If it's relatively closely located, then you can tap the check mark in the bottom right corner. That will take you back to the survey. And for most folks, it's likely that you will say, no, you're not at a new spring because you were probably heading to a particular dot on the map in order to take the spring survey. So you'll probably say no to this answer. Is this a new spring? And that will prompt the question below it to come up. And it's asking you about how accurate the location of the spring information seems. So for most of them, you'll probably say, yes, I see evidence of spring or groundwater or riparian plants, but answer appropriately for what you're seeing in front of you on the landscape. Following that, you'll need to type the site name of your spring into the site name drop-down menu. And as you can see here, there are many options related to Chimney or Chimney Spring. So just be sure that you're picking the right name option. And then that ID number should autofill into the next site ID field. So just verify that it says, in this case, like 802 or whatever you saw on the map. And then you can click the check mark to move on. This access description and site description will automatically appear if it's already been loaded into the database by somebody else who's previously surveyed the spring. These can be really great things to check ahead of going out to survey. Some of them are really detailed and give you very accurate driving and or hiking information for how to access the spring. So take a look at those before you actually head out into the field. And then when you're out there, the survey date and time will be automatically loaded for you. If you are entering data in from a spring you visited previously, this is the place where you can modify the date and time back to some spring you saw a week ago if you're having to enter the data in a little bit later. Be sure to record the weather, how it's precipitating or not out there. And next, the survey prompts you to ask about water flow. What is happening at the spring itself? And just as a little note, these little carrots, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but the caret next to water flow allows you to collapse and expand each section of the survey. So that can be kind of nice as far as like visual organization. But refer to that spring survey document. I just took a screenshot of the kind of things we share within that document. So that document is full of descriptive and visual indicators of what you might be seeing out there so that you can choose the most appropriate answer. And we definitely encourage you to put in details in the notes box because that really helps us be able to understand what you're seeing out there. So when in doubt, if you're kind of choosing between two options, pick the best one and then clarify in the notes box. The sort of third big section here of the survey is asking about site condition. There are many subsections, as you can see, to site condition. We asked about how has the hydrology been altered, maybe by a pipe or an impoundment? What is the soil situation at this site? Do you see fences? Do you see other kinds of infrastructure? What might you see as far as recreation impacts? Is there a trail headed right to the spring? And then, as you all know, the trust is particularly interested in how grazing interacts with springs. And so animal effects is a section that asks a little bit about any kind of grazing impacts that you might see, thinking about that image Mike showed us earlier. So you can just collapse and expand each of these sections. And again, that survey protocols document gives you both descriptive and visual indicators of what you might be seeing. So refer to that document. I do recommend you print that document out with you and take it with you in the field if you're going to do survey springs. Then after assessing the site conditions, we ask you about management recommendations. So again, referring to the spring survey protocols document for more descriptive information than what I have here, but you're going to describe the overall site condition. And then the site classification. If you've done a trip with us before, you may have seen more options in this. We've kind of pared it down a little bit and tried to be as succinct as we can. A reference site refers to something that's outstanding natural condition. Think about that second picture that Mike showed of a healthy spring. A restoration site is something that really needs attention, and you can describe in the recommendations box below what kind of attention you think it needs. An uncertain option is you just don't know, you just need more data. That's a totally acceptable answer. And then none of these. You might come across a site and you're like, yeah, I don't think it's like perfect, but it's not terribly degraded. So you could just say none of these as well. And you can always email us and ask us questions if you are unclear on how to answer this recommendations one. But I would also say don't overthink it too much. Just go with one of these 4 options and then fill in notes boxes as much as you can. Toward the end of the survey, we have optional sections. We are in no way expecting you to know the name of every invertebrate that you see at a spring, but The one optional section, if you have some background information that is helpful, is documenting plants. If you have kind of a rudimentary understanding of which plants are invasive versus native, that can be really helpful information for us to understand as far as restoration efforts that we might need to take. Noting the relative abundance of a species, and if there's grazing of particular species, that can be really helpful to add to this plant section. And for sure, including pictures of plants, which I'll talk about images in just a second, but that is probably, you don't have to know the name of the plant. We can help with that if you can take a good picture of it. Feel free to fill in other parts of the vertebrates or invertebrates if you happen to see animals and critters along the way and you know their names. So finally, photos. This part is really not optional. We would really like folks to add about 3 to 5 photos to every survey that they do. You can take photos within the Survey123 app with this little camera icon. That's the left icon. So if you click on that, it will open up your camera function and allow you to kind of take a photo within Survey123. Alternatively, you can tap the folder icon, and that allows you to upload photos that you've already taken, maybe just with your phone's regular camera app, or I know some of you use Solocator, and that's nice because it has stamped the location already onto the photo. So you're welcome to upload Solocator photos that are saved in your photos in this area. It's very helpful, and we really ask that you always label your photos clearly. The convention we'd love for folks to use is the spring's name, underscore, and then some kind of brief description of what is in the photo. So we have a couple of options there. And then after you've uploaded or taken your photos, you can end your survey. So put in the date and time there, and then hit the little checkbox in the bottom corner. And this will save your survey into a draft or outbox folder. You can see here the screenshot that I have one survey saved in a draft, one in an outbox, and one that I've sent. And we definitely recommend that you send your surveys. So save them in the field in the draft or the outbox folder, and then wait till you're back in Wi-Fi to hit send. Because these are big files that you're sending, it's nice to do it over Wi-Fi because that ensures that David gets all of the data in one fell swoop. Drafts allow, just FYI, drafts allow you to continue modifying the survey later. Outbox kind of says, yep, I'm done with this survey. I'm ready to hit send when I get back home. So that's the difference there. All right. That was a very quick run through of the protocols, but all the details are in that document that Mike just shared over the chat or that we'll share with you after this webinar. So I want to open it up for any questions we might be able to answer about that. Feel free to come off mute and ask them or pop them in the chat box.
So Gisela, I saw your question in the chat. I don't know if other folks saw it, but I put the link in there that Audrey referred to. And so as Audrey said, the best way to make sure you access the app is to follow that from your phone. The easiest way to do that might be finding Audrey's email and clicking the link there. And then it should ask you to open the survey in the app, and hopefully it should show up for you then. So if it's not, let us know and we can help work through that. But if other folks have questions about that too, let's work through.
Yeah, I downloaded it, or I could download it from that email, the initial email that Audrey sent. It's right there, and I looked through it before, so I see all what you talked about.
Perfect. Yeah, Chris asked a question about labeling photos of springs. So the convention we'd love for you to use is the spring's name. So the full name, whatever you typed in above, underscore, and then a short description of what you're seeing. So maidenhair fern, the source, panorama, if you're kind of stepped back from the spring, taking a wide angle view, that's really helpful for us to see more than just the gushing water at the source. So just be as descriptive as you can and try not to use spaces. They can mess up our character counts. You don't have to sign in. I see your question, Gisela, about signing in. So to access the surveys, you just hit that continue without signing in when you first open up the Survey123 app, and that'll allow you to still see our project. So you don't need to sign in. Any other questions? Great. Well, again, thank you all for coming, and I hope to see some of you out in the field this year, and happy spring surveying. I'm going to stop the recording here, and we will be posting this to the Trust Vimeo account and hopefully online in accessible places, but I will also share it with everybody on this call.
Thanks, Audrey.